Hello there, my sleepy travelers. Come closer, pull up a soft cushion, and settle in by the fire's glow. Let the world beyond your window grow quiet, and let your breathing slow like the hush that falls over the hills of the Shire as evening wraps its arms around the day. Tonight, I shall take you to a time far older than most remember, a time before the fellowship, before the white trees' silence, before even the whispers of Mordor became fear. We begin in a place much gentler than what is to come, a land where meadows hum with bees in summer, where rivers laugh in their beds of stone, and where stars begin to sing long before the moon climbs high. The Shire lies still beneath a velvet twilight. Ivy curls over stone fences. A robin coos in the hedgerow. The round doors of hobbit holes are fastened for the night. All is safe, all is well. And so, dear one, take a long, slow breath. Let the hush of Middle-earth lull you, for though we shall speak of ancient wars and lost kings, this tale will be told in a whisper, like a dream shared beneath a starlit sky. Are you ready? Then let us begin. Before we drift deeper into the folds of time, allow me to gently share what lies ahead in this evening's tale. We shall travel back, far back, into the first and second ages of Middle-earth, to a time when the rings of power were newly forged and the world still shimmered with echoes of the Valor's touch. This was a time before Frodo, before Aragorn, when Sauron, no longer a servant of Morgoth, but a dark power in his own right, began to sow seeds of deceit and shadow across the lands. Yet Middle-earth had no fellowship then. No united kingdoms stood watchful in the west. The world faced the coming dark, alone. But fear not, my dear sleepy friend, for our journey through this shadow will be as gentle as the tide at moonrise. With each step, you will feel the moss beneath your feet, hear the wind sigh through the trees of linden, and smell the rain on the stones of Eregion. You will meet elves who sang songs to the stars before men ever walked, and dwarves whose hammers echoed truths far older than the tongues of kings. We shall follow a young elven scribe, quiet, observant, who stumbles upon secrets buried deep within the archives of Elrond's house. Through his eyes, you will witness the making of the rings, the rise of hidden alliances, and the long, slow dawning of a war no one truly understood until it was too late. And if you find comfort in these whispers of old, if the rhythm of Middle-earth brings rest to your heart, I invite you, ever so softly, to support our storytelling. A gentle tap to subscribe, a sleepy like, or perhaps share this journey with another weary soul who may need a story to fall asleep to. Now then, shall we begin? Lean back, close your eyes if you wish. The stars are bright, the road is waiting, and our tale unfolds like mist over the white mountains. Let us wander deeper, together, in the quiet corners of Imladris, where ivy trails like silver veins down smooth stone walls, and the waterfalls whisper songs older than the stars. There lived a young elven scribe named LOTR. He was not a warrior, nor one of grand deeds. He did not wear armor that shimmered with the light of Valinor, or bear a sword that sang in battle. No, LOTR was gentle in spirit, quieter than the rustle of parchment in a moonlit library. His joy came from ink-stained fingertips, from long evenings spent beneath the flowering trees, with scrolls spread out like wings around him. He was known to linger by candlelight, his eyes scanning old tales, piecing together the rhythm of the past, as if listening for a heartbeat beneath the silence. He wore robes of soft gray and blue, the colors of twilight skies and starlit pools, and he walked with a careful pace, never rushing, never disturbing the stillness of the hallways where elven wisdom was kept. There was always something in his gaze that hinted at longing, not for adventure, but for understanding, for truth whispered beneath the surface of time. Elodhir was born after the fall of Numenor, and yet stories of that mighty realm filled his dreams. He had never seen Celebrimbor, nor stood beneath the forges of Eregion, but their echoes called to him all the same. For he was a keeper of memory, a quiet listener of ages past, and in the dust of ancient tomes, he had begun to sense a rhythm, a pattern, something unspoken threading through the histories that no one else had noticed. It began as a feeling, a soft disquiet, certain names erased too carefully, certain years that did not quite align, mentions of rings, not 9, not 7, but many, before the ones we know, before power took its final shape. But Elodhir never spoke of it, not yet. Instead, he continued his quiet life, cataloging, studying, walking beneath the falling leaves of Rivendell's autumn gardens. Yet, when he stood at the balcony each night and looked westward, he felt the sky watching him in return, as if the stars themselves were waiting for him to remember. And so, our tale begins, not with sword nor storm, but with parchment, candlelight, and a question too soft to speak aloud. What was the world like when Middle-earth faced the shadow alone? Close your eyes, dear listener, breathe softly. Let us walk with Elodhir now, beneath the whispering branches and into the forgotten folds of time, where the first war of the rings waited patiently to be found again. The days in Rivendell passed like the slow unfolding of a song, never rushed, never sharp, always lingering with grace. Each morning, as the soft mist clung to the silver leaves of the Meliorn trees, Elodhir awoke not to the call of horns or urgency of war, but to the peaceful rustle of parchment and the distant trickle of water tumbling over ancient stone. The rooms he lived in, quietly tucked beneath an overgrown arch of flowering vines, were lit with the golden touch of the early sun, filtered through stained glass and vine-laced windows. There was always the scent of lavender and aged wood in the air, mingled with the faint aroma of ink and pressed flowers laid between the pages of old books. He would rise slowly, not because he was weary, but because the world itself moved slowly here. Even the air in Rivendell encouraged one to pause, to breathe deeply, and to feel the rhythm of the earth beneath their bare feet. Elodhir's first sips each day were always silent, across smooth stone floors that remembered the footfalls of Elrond, of Glorfindel, of ancient wisdom passed from voice to voice. With a steaming cup of honeyed tea in hand, he would walk to the high balcony that overlooked the eastward hills. And there, every morning, he would greet the world not with words, but with stillness. The wind would hum a quiet tune through the trees. The light would catch the dew on mossy stone. Far below, birds darted through beams of light like scattered stardust. It was in this silence that he felt most at peace, this unspoken conversation between himself and the world. Afterward, Elodhir would make his way to the archives. The Elven library of Imladris was vast, corridors upon corridors of polished wood shelves, each lined with scrolls wrapped in golden threads, books bound in soft leathers, and pages inked by hands long turned to dust. Lanterns floated in the air, ever softly glowing, illuminating narrow reading nooks nestled beneath wide-arched windows. There, he would settle into his usual place, a small alcove beside a circular window draped in ivy overlooking the river Bruinen. He would read until the sun had climbed high above the valley. Some days, he transcribed forgotten songs. On others, he meticulously restored faded passages from crumbling manuscripts, but most often, he simply wandered, following the thread of curiosity wherever it led. He found joy in quiet things, the way a forgotten margin note might hint at a greater truth, or how a worn corner of a page suggested it had once been read many times by someone who now lived only in memory. And yet, lately, something had shifted. It had started small. A passage in a scroll from Ost and Edhill, once thought lost, mentioned rings before the reckoning. It puzzled Elodhir. He knew the tale of the rings of power well, how Celebrimbor forged them, how Sauron's deceit birthed the one. But this passage was older than that, much older. Its language bore the weight of the First Age, and hinted at rings forged not by the hand of Celebrimbor, but long before him. He thought it an error at first. Perhaps the translation was imprecise, but as the days passed, more threads began to surface. A tale from the havens of Sirion spoke of circles of might lost beneath the sea. Another fragment, scribed by a wandering elf of the Phallus, told of a shining band given to guard against the sleep of shadow. These stories had always existed, of course, but they were thought to be poetic allegories, myths layered in metaphor. Now, Elodhir began to wonder, was there something more? A history buried so deep it had become invisible even to the wise. And the signs were not only in the books. One afternoon, while walking the forest paths that curved gently through Rivendell's southern glade, he noticed something strange. There, at the base of an old stone archway, entwined with roots, a patch of white flowers bloomed. That was not unusual in itself, but these flowers, soft-petaled and luminous, were not native to this land. He had seen them once in a drawing from a sailor's record kept in the Grey Havens. They were said to grow only in Aman, far to the west, beyond reach. Elodhir knelt beside them. Their petals shimmered faintly in the light, almost pulsing, and the air around them felt different, warmer, and tinged with something that stirred his heart like a half-remembered song. As he brushed one with his fingers, a soft vibration hummed through the ground, like the last echo of a far-off bell. He said nothing. No one else seemed to notice. But from that moment on, he felt as if he were being watched, not by eyes, but by memory itself. as though the valley around him had begun to listen, to awaken. That night, he could not sleep. Instead, he wandered the quiet halls of the library, listening to the silence. And there, tucked behind a row of dusty volumes on elven medicine, he found something odd, a scroll with no title, sealed with a sigil he did not recognize. He lit a nearby lantern and broke the seal gently. The parchment inside was faded but legible. It spoke of the first rings, forged not in arrogance, but in hope, crafted not to dominate, but to protect the free peoples in a time before Sauron, when a nameless shadow first stirred beyond the edges of the world. It was brief, barely more than a whisper, but it was enough. The next morning, as he walked the familiar garden paths and tended to the small plants growing near his window, Elodhir felt a quiet shift within, a gentle stirring, as though something long asleep had turned in its slumber. He began to hum a song he didn't know he knew. Its melody drifted from his lips like smoke, and as he looked up, he saw that the same white flowers from the glade had begun to grow outside his own window, though he had not planted them. There was a mystery here, but it was not frightening. It was not the darkness of fear, but the soft dusk of forgotten light. And so the days continued, filled with study, quiet walks, soft discoveries. And with each passing hour, Elodhir grew more certain that he was not simply uncovering history, he was stepping into it. The first War of the Rings had left no armies, no ruins, no scars upon the land, but it had left echoes in petals, in songs, in stories too shy to be told aloud. And now, gently, those echoes were beginning to call. The parchment rustled softly in his satchel as he stepped beneath the twilight trees. Somewhere, hidden in the folds of Middle-earth's memory, the truth waited to be heard, and Elodhir was listening. The days continued to unfold softly in Rivendell, as they always had, but to Elodhir, the world had taken on a new tone, a deeper resonance, like the low hum of a harp string plucked just once, still vibrating in the silence. Nothing in the valley had changed, and yet everything had. It began with a path he had never noticed before, near the northern edge of the glade. It wasn't hidden, not really, just overgrown, as if nature itself had forgotten it. Slender branches arched overhead, forming a quiet tunnel where the golden light filtered in slanted beams, catching on drifting motes of dust and pollen. The air smelled richer here, like pine, old stone, and the first raindrops before a storm. He followed the path one quiet evening, after finishing his scroll work and sipping a light tea of chamomile and mint. He brought no lantern, yet the way seemed gently lit from within, as though the trees themselves offered their own silver glow. And there, beneath the shadow of a leaning elm, he found it, a single stone slab, half buried in moss and ivy, etched with elvish runes so faint they might have been whispers carved into moonlight. The script was older than Rivendell itself, older than the days of Gil-galad, perhaps even older than Beleriand. It spoke of a place called Lindoril, where the stars first sang. He knelt beside it, brushing the moss away with reverent fingers. As he touched the stone, he felt, not a vision nor a voice, but a warmth, deep and low, like the breath of a sleeping mountain. The trees swayed though there was no wind. The birds had gone quiet. The world, for a single heartbeat, seemed to hold its breath. From that moment on, the valley began to change around him. The fireflies, which once flickered randomly in the evening dusk, began to gather near him each night, not in swarms, but in soft constellations, hovering gently in circular patterns above his books or forming delicate lines along the garden paths. He watched them with quiet wonder, feeling they were more than simple creatures of light. They were messengers, rememberers. One morning, he awoke to find small feathers on his windowsill, feathers of no bird he knew, silvery white with an opalescent sheen. When he picked one up, it shimmered briefly, then faded into mist in his hand. Another day, by the river's edge, he discovered stones arranged in the shape of the Tengwar letter for echo. He was certain he had not placed them. Yet there they were, cool, smooth, and perfectly balanced, as if laid by unseen hands during the night. Then came the whispers, and yet, lately, something had shifted. It had started small, a passage in a scroll from Ost and Edhill, once thought lost, mentioned rings before the reckoning. It puzzled LOTR. He knew the tale of the Rings of Power well, how Celebrimbor forged them, how Sauron's deceit birthed the one. But this passage was older than that, much older. Its language bore the weight of the First Age, and hinted at rings forged not by the hand of Celebrimbor, but long before him. He thought it an error at first. Perhaps the translation was imprecise. But as the days passed, more threads began to surface. A tale from the havens of Sirion spoke of circles of might lost beneath the sea. Another fragment, scribed by a wandering elf of the Phallus, told of a shining band given to guard against the sleep of shadow. These stories had always existed, of course, but they were thought to be poetic allegories, myths layered in metaphor. Now, LOTR began to wonder, was there something more? A history buried so deep it had become invisible even to the wise, and the signs were not only in the books. One afternoon, while walking the forest paths that curved gently through Rivendell's southern glade, he noticed something strange. There, at the base of an old stone archway entwined with roots, a patch of white flowers bloomed. That was not unusual in itself. But these flowers, soft-petaled and luminous, were not native to this land. He had seen them once in a drawing, from a sailor's record kept in the Grey Havens. They were said to grow only in Aman, far to the west, beyond reach. LOTR knelt beside them. Their petals shimmered faintly in the light, almost pulsing, and the air around them felt different, warmer, and tinged with something that stirred his heart like a half-remembered song. As he brushed one with his fingers, a soft vibration hummed through the ground, like the last echo of a far-off bell. He said nothing, no one else seemed to notice, but from that moment on, he felt as if he were being watched, not by eyes, but by memory itself, as though the valley around him had begun to listen, to awaken. That night, he could not sleep. Instead, he wandered the quiet halls of the library, listening to the silence. And there, tucked behind a row of dusty volumes on elven medicine, he found something odd, a scroll with no title, sealed with a sigil he did not recognize. He lit a nearby lantern and broke the seal gently. The parchment inside was faded, but legible. It spoke of the first rings, forged not in arrogance, but in hope, crafted not to dominate, but to protect the free peoples in a time before Sauron, when a nameless shadow first stirred beyond the edges of the world. It was brief, barely more than a whisper, but it was enough. The next morning, as he walked the familiar garden paths and tended to the small plants growing near his window, Elodhir felt a quiet shift within, a gentle stirring, as though something long asleep had turned in its slumber. He began to hum a song he didn't know he knew. Its melody drifted from his lips like smoke, and as he looked up, he saw that the same white flowers from the glade had begun to grow outside his own window, though he had not planted them. There was a mystery here, but it was not frightening. It was not the darkness of fear, but the soft dusk of forgotten light. And so the days continued, filled with study, quiet walks, soft discoveries, and with each passing hour, Elodhir grew more certain that he was not simply uncovering history, he was stepping into it. The first war of the rings had left no armies, no ruins, no scars upon the land, but it had left echoes, in petals, in songs, in stories too shy to be told aloud. And now, gently, those echoes were beginning to call. The parchment rustled softly in his satchel as he stepped beneath the twilight trees. Somewhere, hidden in the folds of Middle-earth's memory, the truth waited to be heard, and Elodhir was listening. The days continued to unfold softly in Rivendell, as they always had, but to Elodhir, the world had taken on a new tone, a deeper resonance, like the low hum of a harp string plucked just once, still vibrating in the silence. Nothing in the valley had changed, and yet everything had. It began with a path he had never noticed before, near the northern edge of the glade. It wasn't hidden, not really, just overgrown, as if nature itself had forgotten it. Slender branches arched overhead, forming a quiet tunnel where the golden light filtered in slanted beams, catching on drifting motes of dust and pollen. The air smelled richer here, like pine, old stone, and the first raindrops before a storm. He followed the path one quiet evening, after finishing his scroll work and sipping a light tea of chamomile and mint. He brought no lantern, yet the way seemed gently lit from within, as though the trees themselves offered their own silver glow. And there, beneath the shadow of a leaning elm, he found it, a single stone slab, half buried in moss and ivy, etched with elvish runes so faint they might have been whispers carved into moonlight. The script was older than Rivendell itself, older than the days of Gil-galad, perhaps even older than Beleriand. It spoke of a place called Lindaril, where the stars first sang. He knelt beside it, brushing the moss away with reverent fingers. As he touched the stone, he felt not a vision, nor a voice, but a warmth, deep and low, like the breath of a sleeping mountain. The trees swayed though there was no wind. The birds had gone quiet. The world, for a single heartbeat, seemed to hold its breath. From that moment on, the valley began to change around him. The fireflies, which once flickered randomly in the evening dusk, began to gather near him each night, not in swarms, but in soft constellations, hovering gently in circular patterns above his books or forming delicate lines along the garden paths. He watched them with quiet wonder, feeling they were more than simple creatures of light. They were messengers, rememberers. One morning, he awoke to find small feathers on his windowsill, feathers of no bird he knew, silvery white with an opalescent sheen. When he picked one up, it shimmered briefly, then faded into mist in his hand. Another day, by the river's edge, he discovered stones arranged in the shape of the Tengwar letter for echo. He was certain he had not placed them, yet there they were, cool, smooth, and perfectly balanced, as if laid by unseen hands during the night. Then came the whispers, not voices, not in the way one hears words, but songs, faint and distant, rising from the earth when he walked barefoot across damp moss. They hummed in ancient cadences, familiar yet unknown, like lullabies sung to stars before they were born. When he paused, the melodies paused with him. When he breathed deeply, they returned, just at the edge of hearing, always on the brink of memory. One night, near the silver pool beneath the willow grove, he saw a light. It was not a torch nor a lantern. It floated, soft and pale, above the water, shimmering gently like the reflection of a star fallen from the sky. He stepped closer, but not hurriedly, for there was no fear in him, only awe and the hush of reverence. As he approached, the light drifted backward across the pool, and though it did not speak, he felt it call to him, not with sound, but with presence. It wanted him to follow. He waded into the water slowly. The pool was not deep, and its bottom was lined with smooth stones and water flowers that glowed faintly as he passed. With each step, the air around him thickened, not unpleasantly, but like walking into a dream. On the far side of the pool, the light settled atop a small island, no wider than a table. Upon it sat a simple pedestal, and resting there, a ring. Not golden, not jeweled, it was made of silvered wood, woven together like roots twisted in perfect harmony, and in its center shimmered a single tear-shaped stone, clear as crystal, yet glowing with a gentle inner light. He did not touch it. He knelt beside it, letting his breath steady and his heart grow quiet. And as he looked upon it, memories not his own stirred within him, images of forests now vanished, of voices long silent, of a great meeting beneath stars where the firstborn once vowed to protect Middle-earth, not with swords, but with stillness, with song. The ring was not of power, it was of memory. And in that moment, Elodhir understood that this was no artifact of Celebrimbor's forging. This was older, simpler, more sacred. He rose without taking it. Some things are not meant to be claimed. Some truths are better kept as gifts, not possessions. That night, as he returned to his home, the wind carried a faint scent of summer sea, impossible in the hidden valley of Rivendell. He looked up and thought. For a moment, he saw a figure standing far upon the hill, tall, cloaked in silver, face unseen. But when he blinked, it was gone. Still, He did not feel alone, and with each new day, the mystery grew, not in fear or dread, but in gentle beauty. The world had begun to sing to him again, in ways it had not for ages. A fern would curl in greeting as he passed. A patch of moss would brighten beneath his feet. Even the stars above seemed to pulse more warmly when he looked to the west. His readings, too, began to reveal new meanings. Scrolls that once told of battles and bloodshed now whispered of ancient guardians, spirits who watched from the trees, who guided those whose hearts were quiet enough to hear them. He began to suspect that the first rings, those spoken of only in shadows, were not made to control, nor even to protect. They were made to remember, to preserve the balance between song and silence, to keep alive the harmony of the world in its earliest breath. And perhaps, just perhaps, the war had not begun with fire and darkness, but with forgetfulness. It was not evil that had first threatened Middle-earth. It was silence, the kind that comes when memory fades, when stories go untold, when ancient melodies are no longer sung by the hearth. And so the first rings were born, not of greed nor pride, but of longing, a wish to hold onto light, even as the shadow stirred unseen in the farthest corners of the world. Elodhir felt this truth settle into him like a gentle snowfall. The valley of Rivendell still sang, the forest still whispered, and somewhere, beneath moss and thyme, the memory of those first songs still glowed softly in stone and leaf. He did not know yet what he was meant to do, but he knew now that he was listening, and that was the first step of every story that mattered. The days had grown slower, like the turning of ancient pages in a book that few remembered how to read. The wind in Rivendell had taken on a deeper voice, carrying more than breeze. It carried memory, and in that memory, Elodhir found himself standing on the threshold of something old, something hidden beneath the surface of the world. He did not rush toward it. No, he let it come to him slowly, like dawn spilling over a quiet hilltop. The signs had been soft, a shimmer on the bark of a birch tree, a strange reflection in still water, the way moonlight now touched the stone path outside his home and lingered longer than it should have. One morning, the mist was thicker than usual. It curled along the forest floor in silver ribbons, quiet and cool, and it muffled even the birdsong. Elodhir walked the forest path barefoot, drawn by an unseen thread. He carried no bag, no staff, no map, only an old woolen cloak draped loosely around his shoulders and a simple silver brooch shaped like a falling leaf. The path he followed was not marked. It wound softly through old trees whose roots rose like resting animals and branches arched high, holding the sky like a cathedral of green and gold. The light filtered through them gently, flickering like candlelight on stone walls. And then he saw it. A tree, different from the rest, not by size, for it was neither taller nor broader, but by presence. Its bark was pale as frost, its leaves of soft shade between silver and sea foam, and it glowed faintly with its own inner light. Around its base, the moss was silver-threaded, and wildflowers bloomed in colors he had no name for, blue so deep it felt like memory, white so pure it reminded him of stars. Elodhir knelt before it, not from duty, but from instinct. It was a sacred thing, and the air around it felt sacred too. There was no wind here, no movement, only stillness, as if the world held its breath in reverence. He placed his hand gently against the bark. It was warm, and then it happened. A pulse, gentle, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, moved through him. His eyes closed without command, and the world around him faded. He did not fall asleep, and yet he dreamed. He stood upon a great plain, beneath a sky not of this age. The stars above were unfamiliar, burning in patterns long lost to memory. Mountains loomed in the far west, jagged and crowned in gold, while a great forest stretched endlessly in the east, humming with the sound of ancient life. And on that plain stood figures, tall, cloaked in silver and blue, their faces calm and wise. Elves, perhaps, but older than any he had seen in Rivendell. They stood in a circle, hands joined, surrounding a table carved from living stone. Upon the table lay rings, not one, not three, many. Each was different. One shimmered like moonlit snow, another pulsed with a soft crimson glow. A third whispered a song that moved the grass around it, though no wind blew. They were not rings of power, not yet. They were ideas, promises, dreams made visible. The tallest figure lifted one ring and held it aloft, and the vision changed. Elodhir saw fire, not war, not yet, but fire as a forge. A mountain glowed in the distance, not dark and angry as tales of Mordor claimed, but proud and watchful. At its base, craftsmen, elves, dwarves, and even men worked together. Their hammers rang in harmony. Their eyes burned with purpose. It was a time before greed, before betrayal, before Sauron. And Elodhir understood. The first rings had not been weapons. They had been vessels for memory, for healing, for the preservation of beauty in a world already beginning to forget. He opened his eyes slowly. The forest was still. The tree remained before him, its bark softly glowing, and nestled in a hollow near its roots, as though placed with care, was a small wooden box. He hesitated only for a moment before lifting it. The wood was smooth and pale, carved with leaf patterns that pulsed gently under his fingers. He opened it, and inside, on a bed of moss, rested a single ring. It was not grand. It bore no gem. It was made of twisted wood and silver thread, woven so finely that he could not see where it began or ended. It pulsed once with a soft warmth in his hand. Not a demand, not a command, a memory. He heard again the whisper of the wind in the ancient vision, the clang of honest hammers, the soft breath of song across the grass of forgotten plains. The ring was not for power, it was for remembrance, and suddenly he understood why he had been led here. Middle-earth had forgotten much. It had remembered its wars, its victories, its sorrow, but it had forgotten its beginnings. The first rings had not been about rule or dominion. They had been about harmony, created not to control, but to preserve what was already slipping away. The color of leaves before winter, the last star of morning, the names of the rivers before they were mapped. Elodhir placed the box back in the hollow. He would not take it, not yet, perhaps not ever. Instead, he knelt once more, bowing his head, not to the ring, but to the memory it carried. He whispered a single word, ancient and seldom spoken now. Eruana, a blessing, a thank you, a remembrance. The wind stirred at last. The leaves above him danced in soft applause, and a golden petal drifted down, resting gently on his shoulder before being carried out again. He stood and turned back toward Rivendell. The mystery was not solved, not truly, but it had revealed its face, just for a moment, like the glimpse of a star through cloud. And in that glimpse, there was no fear, only peace, and the knowledge that some stories begin not with answers, but with quiet wonder and the willingness to walk slowly into the unknown. The path home felt quieter than it had before, not empty, not abandoned, but quieter, like a song that had drifted to its final note and now lingered only in the hush it left behind. Elodhir walked with slow steps through the golden woods of Rivendell. The sun was low now, filtering through the trees in slanted beams that lit the moss in soft hues of amber and jade. A hush had fallen over the valley, not of silence, but of gentle waiting, as if the land itself was aware that something within him had shifted. He did not speak. He did not need to. There was something beautiful in the silence. He returned to his home, a modest stone cottage nestled near a brook that always hummed like a lullaby. Ivy curled around its windows. The hearth inside still held the ghost of a fire, and as he entered, the scent of dried herbs and polished wood met him like an old friend. He lit the lanterns slowly. Each flame rose without hurry, casting gentle golden circles that danced upon the floor. Then he sat, just beneath the arched window that faced west. He had always liked that window. It showed the world not in grandeur, but in quiet details, the way the wind lifted a single leaf, the curve of moonlight on distant hills, the glow that lingered long after sunset. Tonight, he looked westward, as he had done many nights before, but this time something in his heart had changed. There was a pull, soft and ancient, not toward adventure, but toward an understanding, not to conquer, but to remember. He closed his eyes, and as he breathed, the world of memory returned, not as images, but as feelings. The warmth of the tree's bark beneath his fingers, the weightless hush of the vision, the ring woven of wood and silver thread pulsing gently in his hand, and deeper still, the truth that had whispered to him in that sacred grove. The rings had not always meant power. Before Sauron, before war, before betrayal, they had meant harmony, preservation, remembrance. They were born not from dominance, but from love, for the earth, for the skies, for the gentle turning of the seasons. They were the dreams of those who knew that beauty, once lost, cannot be remade, and so they had captured it, in stone, in song, in silver. Elodhir opened his eyes slowly. A soft wind stirred the curtains. The lantern light flickered, but did not die. He reached for an old journal from the shelf, leather-bound and long unused. Dust whispered from its cover as he opened it. With a quill dipped in silence, he began to write, Not answers, not records, but feelings, memories, questions shaped like poetry. He wrote of the silver tree, of the pulse in the earth, of the ring that sang without sound, of the dream that felt older than language. But most of all, he wrote of the feeling that had stayed with him, that he was part of something, not grand, not heroic, just necessary, like one note in a song that spans centuries. He paused, quill resting against his lips, and looked toward the fire. There was no urgency to this journey, no looming doom, no sword to wield, just a quiet path unfolding, one step at a time. And perhaps, he thought, that was the truth hidden beneath all great stories. That before the clash of armies and the roar of dragons, before crowns and legends and oaths, there had been silence. And in that silence, a single heart listening, like his. He thought of the tales he'd been told as a child, of Gil-galad and Elendil, of the mighty and the noble. But those stories had always begun with battle, not with breath. No one had spoken of the moments before, the stillness that gave birth to the first longing, the first question, the first ring. Perhaps that was what had been forgotten. Not the history, but the hush, the reason behind it all. He stood once more and opened the window fully. The breeze touched his face like a blessing, cool and smelling faintly of pine and river stones. Above, the stars had begun to bloom. They shimmered gently, not in coldness, but in welcome, as if each one remembered him from another time, another life. Perhaps they did. After all, the elves had long believed that the stars were the first lights to greet them in Arda, the first voices of the sky. He looked up now and whispered softly, "Do you remember?" There was no answer, and yet he felt one, in the beating of his heart, in the rustling of the trees, in the calm that filled him from within. He was beginning to understand. The mystery he had uncovered was not something to solve. It was something to carry, like a gentle flame cupped in the hands of a traveler. It did not light the whole world, but it gave warmth to the soul. And that was enough. Elodhir turned and took one final look around his room. The books, the carved wood, the herb bundles tied with twine, the old harp resting in the corner. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had, because now he knew the rings had once sung of harmony, and though their music had long been drowned by time and war, there were still those who listened, who remembered, who walked softly, not to disturb the echoes. He smiled, quietly, to himself. The journey was not over, not yet. But for now, it was enough to sit in the glow of lantern light, with the wind at his window and the stars overhead. The morning came, not with the brilliance of trumpets, nor the bold rise of sunfire across the skies, but with the gentlest gray mist that clung to the hills like a shawl. Elodhir had risen before the first bird had sung, wrapped in the stillness of a world just waking. His steps carried him beyond the comfort of home, but not far, just enough to follow where the earth gently whispered him onward. The road beneath his boots was barely a road at all. It was more a memory of footsteps worn into the hills by those who had passed this way long ago, though no sign remained of who or why. He did not hurry. No one in Middle-earth who sought true wisdom ever did. The path wove through birch and ash, beneath branches pale with early morning dew. Leaves danced above him like dreams waiting to be remembered, and the air smelled faintly of elderflower and moss. Then he heard it, a soft rustle, deliberate yet unhurried, not a squirrel nor a deer, the kind of movement that bore the memory of knowledge, not danger, but presence. Elodhir slowed his pace around the bend, standing just beside a quiet spring that trickled down a bank of mossy stones, was a tall figure draped in green-gray robes that shimmered slightly in the wet morning air. His hood was drawn low, but a gentle gleam of silver hair trailed from beneath it, catching the rising light. "Peace upon the road, wanderer," said the figure, his voice soft, low as wind through pine, but rich as ancient stone. Elodhir bowed slightly, instinctively. "And peace upon yours," he replied. The figure stepped forward, revealing an ageless face, not unkind, but deeply still. It was not the stillness of boredom or detachment, but the kind that came from listening for a very, very long time. "I am Killarneyan," the elf said simply, "of the house of Nargothrond, though that place has long been swallowed by river and time." Elodhir's heart stirred. Nargothrond, he had read of it in old books. A hidden kingdom of the First Age, now only remembered in song and sorrow. "You walk the westward road," Killarneyron said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Few do now." Elodhir nodded. "I follow something I do not yet understand." "That is the truest path," Killarneyron murmured. "Come, sit, the stones are dry." Together, they sat upon a weather-worn bench of root and rock beneath the tall willows, beside the spring whose water sang softly into the earth. The elf carried no weapons, no scrolls, no staff of power, only silence. And into that silence, slowly, Elodhir poured his story, of the ring that pulsed without flame, of the visions that shimmered through leaves, of the whisper in his bones that did not speak in words, but in wonder. Killarneyron listened, never interrupting. When Elodhir finally stopped, the silence did not feel empty. It felt honored. "There are still those," the elf said at last, "who remember when the rings were sung into being, not for war, but for remembrance, each one shaped with care to echo something the world must not forget." Elodhir asked, why was the memory not enough? Why shape it in silver? "Because memory fades," Killarneyron said, turning his eyes to the light-dappled water, "and because beauty must sometimes be held, if only for a while. The first rings were not meant to rule, but to cradle, like cupping water in your hands to remember its coolness." A quiet passed between them. The breeze stirred a few willow strands into the stream. A bird called once, then fell silent. "There are others who remember?" Elodhir asked. Killarneyron nodded. "Scattered, quiet. They do not seek thrones, they carry lanterns. One such waits ahead." They parted not with farewells, but with shared glances, the kind that said, "We understand each other now," and that was enough. As the afternoon waned, the sky took on a golden hue, and the road led Elodhir toward a glade where the trees gave way to low hills covered in heather and fern. There, a figure sat cross-legged upon a flat stone, young in form, but old in bearing. A woman this time, though not quite elf, and not quite mortal either. She wore robes of twilight blue, and her eyes were pools of starlight that did not belong to any single race of Arda. She looked up as he approached, smiling like someone who had been expecting a letter that finally arrived. "You walk with questions," she said, "and dreams that do not sleep." He sat beside her, wordlessly. The scent of lavender and wild mint filled the air. "I am Aerolith," she offered, plucking a sprig of sage and rolling it gently between her fingers. "I walk the forgotten roads, and you have touched the past, haven't you?" Elodhir nodded slowly. "Do you know," she whispered, as if to the grass itself, "that the land listens too? The roots remember where the rings were forged, not just the grand ones in fire and mountain, but the quiet ones made by those who did not want power, only to preserve." He turned to her. Was that the first war of the rings? She smiled again, this time wistfully. A war of memory, not of armies. A war between those who wanted to hold the world close and those who sought to reshape it. And for a long time, as stars began to peek through the sky, they simply sat together, no more words, only a shared understanding that something vast and ancient had passed through them both. When the evening deepened, Aerolith gave him a small woven pouch. "Inside is nothing," she said, "and yet everything. It is for remembering." And she was gone, not with sound, not with farewell, just gone, as if the mist had gathered her up like a song fading into silence. Elodhir continued on. He passed trees that bent slightly in his direction, rocks that seemed to hum faintly underfoot. Even the breeze had changed, no longer random or wandering, but as though guiding him gently with invisible hands. He thought of Calarnian, of Aerolith, of their lantern-light wisdom. They had not taught him truths like lessons from a scroll. They had not armed him or crowned him or sent him to battle. They had listened. They had remembered. They had walked beside him, not ahead of him. And perhaps that, he realized, was the oldest magic of all, companionship, not the loud kind of roaring feasts and clashing swords, but the quiet bond of two souls who share a stillness beneath the stars. The road curved westward, and Elodhir, with nothing more than memory in his pouch and a ring of wood and silver around his neck, stepped gently onward into the darkening night. The journey was far from over, but it no longer felt lonely, because now he knew there were others. Not many, but enough. And sometimes, on the oldest roads, enough is all you need. The stars above the hills of Eriador had always been beautiful, but tonight they seemed to breathe. They shimmered not in flickers, but in slow pulses, like the steady rhythm of a lullaby humming from the sky itself. Elodhir stood quietly at the edge of a small meadow where tall grass bowed in unison to the whispering wind. Beyond the reach of torches or town light, the world was aglow only by the soft silver of Ithil, the moon, and the deep hush of the stars above. He had traveled far, yet this place, this still glade, nestled between the gentle hills and cradled by an arc of willow and elm, felt as though it had been waiting just for him. A circle of stones, smoothed by weather, moss, and memory, rested at the heart of the glade, not carved by tool, but shaped by time. And there, beside the stones, a quiet campfire flickered, not roaring, not grand, just enough light to warm the space between two souls. Elodhir stepped gently into the clearing where two figures already sat. One was Killarneyon, the elf of fading lore whom he had met by the spring. The other he recognized only by the subtle shimmer of twilight blue, Aerolith, the one who had spoken of roots and memory. They turned toward him as if he were simply arriving home. "No greetings are needed," Killarneyon said softly. "The fire knows your name." And so Elodhir joined them. No questions, no declarations, just the quiet peace of belonging, like the final puzzle piece sliding into place. Above them, the sky deepened. The stars twinkled, not as distant lights, but as old friends returning. Aerolith stirred the fire once, and it crackled softly, not loud enough to disturb, only enough to echo warmth. Then she began. "Before the 9, the 7, or even the 3, she said gently, there were rings that bore no titles, crafted in silence, worn by none, made not with power, but with love." Elodhir listened, his eyes half closed, the firelight dancing softly across his face. Killarneyon picked up the thread. Long ago, when the world was still learning the shapes of seasons, there lived a weaver in the far west, where forests grew thick and rivers had not yet forgotten the stars they once flowed beneath. She was neither elf, nor man, nor Maya, but something between. She wove not with thread, but with memory. Aerolith added, each thread she gathered came from the land, sunlight caught in dew, laughter soaked into bark, sorrow buried in stone. With these she wove the first ring, not for wearing, but for singing. Elodhir asked in a hush barely louder than the fire, what song did it carry? "Not a song you'd know," Killarneyon said with a small smile. "It could not be heard with ears, only with the heart that remembers." The fire sparked briefly, sending a single golden ember upward, and with it, a breeze rolled softly across the glade, curling around them like a story being carried onward. Aerolith reached into a small pouch at her side and withdrew a smooth oval stone. "This," she said, setting it in Elodhir's palm, "was once part of the Tower of Aelinor, a place where stories were not told, but planted, like seeds. When they were ready, they bloomed in dreams." Elodhir stared at the stone, feeling not its weight, but its warmth. Faint, like a memory you can almost recall, hovering just beyond reach. And then, the stories truly began. Killarneyon told the tale of Thindarion, a ring once carved from pearl and frost, given to a reindeer that wandered alone through the gray mountains. It was said that wherever he stepped, the snow would melt gently, and forgotten paths would reveal themselves. He was never seen, but often sensed, by lost travelers who suddenly found their way. Aerolith whispered the legend of Elenvir, the star ring, given not to a king or warrior, but to a child born under an eclipse. This ring held no gem, only a hollow core, but when placed near a flame, it cast shadows that showed not what was, but what might be. Their voices wove gently together, and as they spoke, the fire did something strange. It shifted, not wildly, but subtly. The flames seemed to rise higher during certain names and lower during moments of sorrow. When Calurnion spoke of the fall of Irigaeon, the hidden forge where the rings of power had first been made, the fire dimmed until it looked like a single ember weeping at the edge of night. And yet, it never felt frightening, for in every sorrow told, there was also resilience. Elodhir sat in silence, the weight of these ancient tales settling into him like soft rain upon the earth. He understood now why the trees bowed when he passed, why the stars pulsed more deeply above certain hills, why the ring he'd found long ago had never called for power, but for listening. The land was not sleeping, it was remembering. And through those gathered here, it was telling its story again, softly, so as not to wake the world too suddenly. Aerolith leaned back and gazed at the stars. "Did you know," she said, "that each of those lights above us has heard these stories before? That they watched as the first smiths shaped silver into hope and gold into remembrance? The stars are not silent, they are patient." Calurnion nodded. In the first war, long before armies marched, it was not steel that struck first, but silence, a forgetting, and it was in that forgetting that darkness found its way back in. Elodhir looked up. The stars looked back. He felt them, not as distant lights, but as quiet companions. "What ended the first war?" he asked. Neither Aerolith nor Calurnion answered right away. Instead, they let the question rest. And after a while, Calurnion said, "Perhaps it never truly ended. Perhaps it sleeps, as we do beneath moonlight. But every time a story is told around a fire like this, every time someone remembers without fear, the darkness grows quieter." Aerolith smiled gently. "That is why we speak, not to change the world with thunder, but to remind it, softly, of who it once was." The fire crackled once more, and the glade fell into a hush that was not empty, but full of memory, full of starlight, full of the gentle breath of a world that, though bruised by ages past, still dared to dream in silver and shadow. Elodhir did not need to speak. He only nodded, his soul swelling with something older than words. And so they sat, no ending, no climax, just the long, slow unfurling of a night, wrapped in wonder and the promise that tomorrow the road would still be there, quietly waiting to remember with him. The dawn came gently, not in bright color or sudden chorus, but in that slow, breath-like unfolding of pale blue into silver. The stars above faded, not with haste, but like soft candles being covered one by one. And in that tender silence, the glade stirred only slightly. Elodhir rose quietly from where he had rested, wrapped in his cloak of moss green and twilight gray. The warmth of the fire still lingered in the air, though only a few glowing embers remained at its heart. Aerolith and Calurnion were gone, but not without trace. On a flat stone beside the fire, a single silver leaf had been left behind, its veins etched in ancient patterns of Valinor. He picked it up, holding it between his fingers as the first light of morning kissed its edge. It shimmered faintly, and then the wind shifted. A soft current, warmer than the morning should have allowed, brushed his cheek, carrying with it not scent, but memory. The scent of old parchment, golden applewood, and the quiet breath of mountain caves long sealed, and beneath it all, a voice, not words, but a calling. Elodhir turned west. The hills rose gently, and beyond them, the forests of Menhiriath curved toward the gray shores of the sea. Yet the call came not from land, but from a hollow in the hills, a place he had passed many times, yet never truly seen. It was there the mystery would rest. He knew this now, not with logic or proof, but with the soft assurance of a dream that feels more real than waking. So he walked, no rush, no urgency. Each step was taken as though the earth welcomed his footfall, guiding him not across distance, but across time. The path he followed soon narrowed into a corridor of willow and ivy. The trees leaned inward here, forming a green hush overhead. Between their trunks, small white flowers bloomed despite the season, and the air was filled with a hush too perfect to be silence. It was remembrance. The grove opened into a bowl-shaped hollow, cradled in stone and moss. And there, standing tall in the center, was a tree, not mighty like the mallarns of Lothlorien, nor vast like the oaks of the old forest, but quiet, slender, and ageless. Its bark shimmered like polished moonlight, and its leaves were white, veined with silver. They did not rustle, they whispered. Elodhir stepped closer. At the base of the tree, the earth rose in a small mound of polished stone, curved like a cradle, and set into its side, half buried by root and time, was a carving, a ring, not worn, not forged, but grown. The ring was made of roots and light, interwoven into a circle that pulsed gently with the rhythm of the tree itself. Elodhir reached out, not to touch it, but to listen. And then it came. The truth, not spoken in grand prophecy, nor shouted by some ghostly king, but breathed like a lullaby. The white tree, this tree, was not merely a symbol of Gondor, nor a relic of elven kind. It was the memory of a promise. In the first war, long before Sauron, before the crafting of the 9, 7, and 3, before Celebrimbor shaped gold into glory, there was another darkness, a silence that fell across Middle-earth when the Elves first left for Valinor and men were left to walk the world alone. In those early days, the darkness was not a being. It was forgetting. The memory of the stars faded. The songs that once echoed through forests fell quiet, and the land, no longer named in the old tongue, began to sleep. But one gift remained, a tree, planted not in defiance of shadow, but in love for the world that still lingered in light. It was said that the Valar whispered its name only once, Londalov, the dream root. The tree did not guard, it did not fight, it remembered, and through its memory, the land held fast. It had no throne, no fortress, only roots that wound through rock and water, holding fast the stories that had not yet been forgotten. Elodhir bowed his head. Tears touched his lashes, not of sorrow, but of recognition, for he too had felt this pull, this gentle ache for something he could not name, and now he knew. He had not been called to awaken some ancient weapon. He had been called to remember, to let the memory live in someone who still walked, still breathed, still sang the soft songs of twilight. And as he stood there, the roots beneath the tree pulsed gently. The ring shimmered once, and then faded into stillness, as if it had spoken all it needed. Elodhir sat beside the tree, back resting against its trunk, and looked skyward. He saw the stars even though they were gone from the sky. He heard the songs even though no one sang, and in that moment, the war, whatever shape it had once taken, was quiet, not ended with sword or crown or spell, but with breath, with memory, with peace. Somewhere in the distant valleys, birds began their morning calls. Soft and clear, the day returned, as it always had, but something had shifted. The mystery had not been solved like a riddle, it had unfolded like a flower. Elodhir remained beneath the tree until the sun rose high, and then, gently, he stood. He did not mark the path he had taken, nor did he carve his name into the stone, for the memory did not need to be held by words. It was now part of him, and through him it would live. As he made his way back toward the open road, the wind stirred the leaves of Landaloth, sending a hush into the air like a mother's last lullaby. The First War had never truly been about armies. It was about forgetting and remembering. And in this gentle act of remembrance, Middle-earth had taken one soft breath closer to healing. And so, my dear sleepy travelers, the road we've walked together now begins to slow. The winds that once stirred the glades have softened, and the last flickers of starlight now settle like feathers on the quiet land. The tale of Elodhir, gentle and slow as the turning of seasons, draws near its end, not with thunder or fire, but with peace blooming like moonflowers in the hush of night. Perhaps you, too, felt it, the gentle breath of the trees, the shimmer of forgotten stories hiding in the roots beneath your feet. Maybe the wind carried a voice, faint and clear, reminding you of something you'd long tucked away. A feeling, a longing, a soft ache for beauty that never truly left. These are not grand tales of battle and crowns. This was a tale of stillness, of remembrance, of walking quietly with the land and letting it whisper back to you. Elodhir did not return to write books or build statues. He went home, as all travelers must, back to his small cottage at the edge of the woods where the smoke from his hearth curled lazily toward the clouds. He tended his garden again, listened to the river, and lit his lanterns at dusk. And though he spoke little of the tree or the memory it held, something in him had changed. Not on the outside, not in the way neighbors might point and say, "Ah, he's been touched by something mighty." No, the change was quieter. He listened more deeply. He walked more slowly. He hummed tunes that had no words, songs that had been buried in stone and soil and starlight long before the first age had even begun. And the land responded. The birds gathered a little closer to his doorstep. The foxes left no tracks by his herbs. And the white tree, though hidden far beyond the hills, was no longer alone, for now one more heart carried its memory forward. You see, that is how Middle-earth endures, not by the might of sword or spell, but by quiet hearts that remember what was and protect what is. Maybe you too have something like that inside you, a whisper of a world you once dreamed of, a light, soft and steady, flickering behind your ribs even on the coldest nights. And tonight, as you drift toward sleep, I hope you let it glow. Let it guide you across green hills and moonlit paths. Let it bring you to a fire that never goes out and a sky filled with stars that remember your name. You don't need to know the way. You're already on the road. And though the war may have been long ago, though the great rings may lie buried and the old forests sleep, you are still part of the tale, still listening, still remembering, still dreaming. So now, as the last embers of the fire fade and the hush of night folds around you, I'll leave you with this thought. Middle-earth is never far. It waits just beyond the veil of sleep, in the soft rhythm of your breath, in the warm press of blankets, in the flicker of a lantern by your bed. Close your eyes, my friend. Let the world fall away. You've traveled far and well, and the white tree remembers you. Sleep peacefully now, and may the stars light your dreams. Good night, and may the gentle winds of the west carry you home.